Hi again. Dwight Wilson, Armageddon Now, Chapter 3, which is entitled Armageddon Almost, talking about the response to World War I and especially the Russian Revolution. This is page 47. The support for restoration in Zionism was almost universal among premillenarians, but there were those who had second thoughts. Protestant missionaries in the Middle East of the Old Line denominations were usually resistant to Jewish nationalism. This was especially true of those missionaries who worked among the Arabs. A writer in The King's Business recognized the reality of the situation and admitted, "The Zionists are going to oppose us," but he was optimistic that the true Christianity of the premillennialists would lead and direct them aright when the Zionists discovered that true Christianity was not a persecuting Christianity. Our Hope's doubts, on the other hand, seem to stem from a reassessment of its earlier enthusiasm, and this is the magazine Our Hope, published by Arno Gaebelein, that's quoted next. What the Jews are doing today is an infidel movement which will land them in the darkest night. We mention these facts for the sake of so many of God's people who begin to see these things, but think that the ever-increasing efforts of Zionism to regain the land is the restoration of which the prophets have spoken. It is not. The true restoration and blessing of Israel comes with the coming of the Lord. End of quote. This did not mean that God's hand was not in everything. It just implied that not everything that happened was good or right. The unusual aspect here is that a critical attitude was expressed towards Israel's actions. Such antipathy was usually reserved for Russia and her accomplices, in spite of the fact that Russia too was part of God's movements according to the premillenarian philosophy of history. The best representative expression of this attitude towards Russia was embodied in the wartime book, At Hand, by the English author Walter Scott. That's not Walter Scott, the author of Ivanhoe, but a much later Scott, 100 years later. In it he reiterated views he had expressed nearly 40 years before. Quote, "We, of course, rejoice in every check given to Russia in the Near and Far East, but we are perfectly satisfied that by the force and strength of her battalions, she will yet crush all opposition. She is the destined master in the East. Her battalions will by sheer strength of numbers sweep all before them." End of quote. He predicted, moreover, on the basis of Ezekiel 38 verse 13, which refers to the merchants of Tarshish, that Britain's wartime alliance with Russia would not last long. In the early part of the war, Russia seemed to follow premillenarian expectations. In an article in Our Hope, Russia and the Future, Arno C. Gaebelein observed that the statesmen of Europe recognized the ultimate menace of Russia, just as biblical scholars knew that this great power of the North would play a prominent and to herself fatal part during the predicted end of the age. In another piece, he cited an entire article from the London publication Scripture Truth, which explained that, quote, "Russia has yet to play a prominent and most malevolent part in these very countries before Israel is established without menace or fear in the land promised to her of old by Jehovah." End of quote. The author interpreted the phenomenal successes of the Russians against the Turks to be in line with scriptural predictions. He contrasted this to the total failure of the British campaign in the Dardanelles. And here's the quote. "But what is so significant is that Russian arms are alone successful. In spite of the gallantry of the British troops in the Dardanelles, the campaign there proved to be a complete failure, and the dispatches of the generals commanding describing the failure leave the impression upon the mind that some unseen force was against them, for nothing seemed to transpire as was intended. But when the decision was made to withdraw the troops, everything changed. It seemed as though God's hand was against the armies of Britain while they remained in territory that must come under another power, according to his word, but was for them from the moment the decision was taken to withdraw. That is, God's blessing was with them when they withdrew." End of quote. All of this supposed determinism indicated that the time cannot be far off when the hordes from Russia, swollen by the masses from her newly conquered territories, would come to Palestine to destroy the Jews. Then God himself, in a fierce judgment of fire, would slaughter these multitudes of Gog in fulfillment of Ezekiel 39, verse 12. The great Armageddon seemed all the nearer as England and France reluctantly consented to Russia's war aim of domination over Constantinople after the war. Gaebelein saw this development as very significant. I'm going to link a video we did not that long ago on the history of Watchtower books and interpretations of the book of Ezekiel. And the particular video that starts that series is entitled One Book, that is one biblical book, Two Personality Cults, the cults of Russell and Rutherford, represented by two interpretations of the book of Ezekiel and Revelation, penned originally by Russell and its successor by Rutherford. So that first video is on your screen, along with the Ezekiel playlist we have created. See you soon.